The discussions will be opened by Dr. Macoumba Diouf, who is the Director General of the Senegalese Institute of Agricultural Research. And he has 5 minutes to do so. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Monsieur le Président,
Chair, I would like to say some few words as discussion's opening. With regard to the topic of this panel, but also I would like to insist, as Roy-MaCauley did it earlier on aspects related to science and technology in order to facilitate an economic transformation which should be an effective one in our different countries. First of all, I would like to remind to us a context which has not facilitated things. We want to achieve an economic transformation in the field of agriculture in order to have food security and reduce poverty, whereas an environment, land environment has become more hostile. You know, you have climate change, we have soil poverty, and the labor, as has been said by Usman, labor leaving rural areas for other areas, especially urban areas. This context is not obvious, he says. It means that if you are talking about economic transformation in agriculture sector, it means that we should have more productivity and more competitiveness. These, too, should have raw material, science and technology. I want to name technological innovations. Of course, but with a support from investments. Investment is very important. Well, to recall Maputo Declaration, it was said that states should allocate 10% of their budget into agriculture, but we have to recall that they also committed themselves to allot 1% to the research budget. This has not been much highlighted so far. It means that policies, the speakers, the politicians should see to a higher effectiveness of those measures. Otherwise, all the investments, other investments that are going to be affected will not provoke the expected results. I said at the beginning of my speech, I said productivity and competitiveness. Productivity, we have to use technological measures, and productivities, we have to respect a certain number of norms or standards, and also factoring in some constraints. It is to conclude my speeches around these indispensable need, this absolute need of the use of sciences and technologies, and this for small holding. This has been touched on by Dr. Roy-MaCauley, that agribusiness is very important. We need both. Since he said agriculture entrepreneurs, intensification of agriculture or modernization of agriculture also goes to the benefit to the smallholder. Somebody said it, I think our first speaker, he said that it is at the level of the smallholders that we have a lot of deficiencies. It means that if we encourage larger scale adoption of technologies, as we can see it in West Africa with WAP, then we are creating conditions for a higher productivity and competitiveness. And thus, we are creating high attractiveness since the youth stays in rural areas. We need a minimum in order to keep them in these areas. So we need another type of farmers, including people working on a small scale level. So it is chartered agriculture until mechanization that we need to modernize agriculture. So, Chairperson, it is to kick off the discussions. We have to insist on the potentials that Africa has. Africa has very important land reserves. Africa is considered to be the continent which is going to feed the world. There is also a gap in productivity. In northern countries, we have GMO. It means that they have finished their ways of maximizing the yields. We haven't yet started in Africa with the composite material. We have productivity gaps from 2 to 8. Talking about Senegal. So we can actually multiply by 2 and by 8 for other countries. So it's very important to exploit the genetical potentials, the best varieties and quality seeds. Yes, the contest is difficult, but if we invest, the potential will help us make it. This is what I wanted to say, Chairperson, to start these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe that Dr. Diouf has provided enough material for us to have a fruitful discussion. I'll now go to the floor and ask those who are interested in making very brief comments and straight to the point so that we can have as much participation as possible before we break out for lunch. Yes, please.
Merci. Monsieur Diouf, merci pour votre intervention.
Thank you, Dr. Diouf, for your words. I think opportunities in terms of land resources to factor in opportunities in terms of resources, biodiversity resources, because when you're talking about food security today, I think it is very important, technological innovation, investment, support to the smallholders. But West Africa that I know well has not yet got foodstuffs composition table. So research should be interested in this. That is, Dr. Harold said something about Paris Declaration. These are efforts that are being deployed. These efforts are not coordinated efforts. Thank you. I'm changing temporarily the chairperson. We're going to usher in.
Paul, I'd like to make you a dictator. You can choose which country, either Uganda or Ethiopia. You have a guaranteed reign of 20 years, and you have to choose between growth and distribution from your model. If you grow, you have the opportunity to redistribute, and so to achieve a Pareto optimal outcome in some way. Perhaps if you don't grow, you may have less political trouble in the short run. Which will you choose over a 20-year period, and why?
D'autres questions? Merci. Oui, allez-y.
Thank you. My name is Abdul Fal, and I have to commend all the panelists from the ministerial one until this current one. I have a question. We are talking about transforming agriculture to be the engine of growth and reduction of poverty and promoting food security, but we are not talking about agribusiness. I think we have to incorporate, we have to include this, because if we want to control poverty and improve upon the food security, our agriculture should be integrated in a value chain where productivity gains from the value added created at the end of the chain. These gains should also be shared equally by farmers. We can't talk about agriculture, productivity, growth without talking about agri-food businesses in our countries, and agri-policy without an integration of issues of agri-business, agri-food businesses, and the rest. These poses, to me, I have a problem about that.
My question is to Harold. Let's be realistic about this. Most of the national agri-research stations in West Africa are at best not functioning. At worst, their productivity is zero. How do you square this with what you're talking about in CORAF's involvement with these national agri-research stations?
Une autre question, juste derrière.
Merci. My question is for Paul Dorosh. It is about your finding. You show that the increasing investment in agriculture does not lead to economic growth. I would like to know, was it your expectation? And how far this finding is consistent with finding elsewhere? And how do you explain also this finding? Because most of the time, I think, I will give you my explanation. I think the problem is mainly in terms of efficiency in the use of agriculture investment. If I take the case in Senegal, we see that we are investing a lot in agriculture, but the efficiency is lagging behind. I can give the example of the subsidy again. Instead, we are subsidizing input, but most of the time we see that the subsidy does not is not focusing, is not targeting, and most of the time we see some misuse of the subsidy. Even we see that the subsidies across the borders and go elsewhere. In this situation, we see that the expected result cannot be done. And the other thing is also in terms of investment. Most of the time, the investment in agriculture are focused on operating costs instead of targeting the real need in terms of agriculture investment. I can give the example of water control, the example of mechanization. And I think if you take into consideration this misuse or this lack of efficiency in the use of in agriculture investment, we can make agriculture more productive in terms of leading to economic growth. The other contribution I want to make is about CORAF presentation. I think it is a good presentation, and you even really put the point. I think, as I said before, the productivity is a key issue in agricultural improvement, in agricultural growth. We need to focus on increasing productivity in Africa, and in World Bank agenda of transformative agriculture, it is a main issue we want to work in. In this issue, also technology transfer is a key issue we want to target. We have developed it under the WAP, the West African Productivity Program. We are running over 30 countries, over West African countries. We are focusing on scaling up the transfer of technology over Africa, generating technology, and also enabling the condition of letting this technology across the borders and in order to improve the productivity of the farmers. And I think it is a key issue that all partners need to work, and we need also the support of researchers like IFPRI to better provide evidence on the impact of this strategy of scaling up transfer of technology over African countries. Thank you.
I will take one more contribution and then go to the panel, after which we'll come back to the floor. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My name is Swadu. I'm from IFPRI. I have just a question to Paul Dorosh. According to your presentation, investment lead to an increase of GDP in urban areas and to a reduction of poverty in rural areas. So in the context of population growth, someone stated that we will have 70% of population in urban areas. So according to this population growth, in which way do you think that policies should be oriented in order to deal with this trade-off? Thank you.
So let's go to the panelists. You know which questions you have to respond to so that we carry on. Yes, Doctor.
Okay. Merci. I'm going to answer in English so that I can maybe clarify some things. And I'll do the questions essentially in reverse order. There's this question of, does agricultural investment increase total growth, and does it reduce poverty? And IFPRI had done a lot of work in support of CADEP, and if you weren't a big fan of agriculture, what you would say is, okay, but what about if you had put that same amount of money into industry? Then what, right? Because as long as we say here, let's spend an extra 10 milliards francs in agriculture, yep, it sure does increase total growth, it sure does reduce poverty. And so those CADEP scenarios definitely hold. But then the question is, let's hold total government public investment constant. And let's shift a little bit of that pie to agriculture. And if you do, you're cutting industry and services investment, right? Urban investment. Or let's do another scenario where we're going to hold total investment constant and let's shift a little bit more into urban. Then what happens, okay? So that's this kind of scenario. So first point, investing in agriculture raises productivity, reduces poverty. CADEP simulations still hold. We're firmly behind investments in agriculture. But then the question is, what if someone was crazy enough to give me, to give any economist power over government spending? And if you did that, which one would I choose? And again, I wanted to, it didn't come out so clearly in this, in the very quick presentation, but in the baseline, we have 3% growth per year in Uganda. And when we shift investment a little bit more towards agriculture, economic growth falls to 2.8%. I still get sizable overall GDP growth, but if I'm willing to let GDP growth go from 3 to 2.8, I can get a big kick in terms of reducing rural poverty. So there's a growth equity trade-off. I lost 0.2% growth, but I made a big difference on rural poverty. And so the message there, I think, from this economist anyway, is I like that trade-off. I like reducing growth a little bit. We still need the economic growth. And that scenario that we did had that growth. But to reduce poverty is very important. And then if I could just come back finally to the old CADEP runs, the old analysis of CADEP. All the time when there was an analysis of CADEP, there was always accompanying non-agricultural growth. If you had an economy that only increased agricultural output without increasing other parts of the economy, agricultural prices would collapse. for any good that's not completely tradable. So we still need some kind of balance here. This presentation is arguing that let's push that balance of public investment a little bit more towards agriculture. And if we do, the analysis suggests that we could get a sizable payoff in countries like Ethiopia, Uganda, high shares of ag GDP, high shares of poverty in rural areas. We could get a big payoff in terms of overall poverty reduction. And that's even under these scenarios where we were, in some sense, I would say, wildly optimistic about urban growth and maybe a little bit pessimistic about rural growth. Thanks.
I think there's just one question which I would like to respond to, and that's the question of the strengths of the national agricultural research institutions. We have a Director General here. He might be able to answer it more than I, but I would like to take it from a regional perspective. Now, if you ask a Director General, he has a mandate, and he has to deal with research priorities that are specific of his own country, and he needs investment to do that. The question is, has he got enough investment to actually carry out that mandate? So which means he might be strong in some areas and weak in others. So what I'm saying is that from my own observation and my experience with the national agricultural research systems, we can't say a research system or an institution is weak or strong. What we can say is a research institution is weak in some areas and strong in other areas. That's the first point. Now, in terms of the way we're looking at this and we're responding to this, is the second component of the model that I spoke about. So we are saying, since we don't have the level of investment that we need to do everything as a national agricultural research institution, let's look at what we can do. What are our comparative advantages? And we have done this. So what we're saying is that we're saying each country, for example, at the moment, should focus on a particular, this is an example, it could happen across the board, focus on a particular commodity. For example, Ghana is focusing on roots and tubers because they have, when we look at the whole of West Africa, they have the comparative advantage. So we're saying build your research and your institution around this particular commodity, delivering technologies, dissemination, adoption on all the mechanisms that would lead to growth. In the process, we're asking you, Ghana, to also accommodate the other countries, research scientists. So we're looking at it, open up to the region because you have the comparative advantage so that you can help the other countries satisfy their needs. Now, so what I'm saying is that we don't need to have a roots and tuber laboratory or research center in every country. We focus on one particular country and all the other countries agree to work with this. So, and it happens. We have 9 of what we call the centers, national centers of specialization, which we're working on these centers to evolve into regional centers of specialization so that they can develop themselves, strengthen themselves, and work in partnership with other institutions like the CGIR. So that's the way I see it, and that's the way we're working, and that's part of the model that we're developing.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
J'ai pas eu de questions. J'ai donné un avis seulement sur 2 questions. La première, c'est celle évoquée par...
There was the first comment from the first person who was asking the question. He said the need to harness more the biodiversity. I do agree with your comments, over your comments. And since he's saying something about Africa that he knows well, I have to tell him that with regard to Senegal, I was very impressed by the approach of malnutrition units of Senegal, and they were proposing things that you're saying, and this unit should get closer to ISRA so that we can actually work together on conventional pre-manufactured feeds. That is to encouraging agric diversification so that the solution to nutrition problems will come from production of farmed species in our ecosystems, and this is the current approach. The unit against malnutrition in Senegal, these are the things that they are doing. Just to tell you that I agree with the gentleman who raised this issue. In addition to feeding issues, we also have issues germane to nutrition to solve. I think Mr. Fall said something about the agri-business. Yes, it's very important to think about this to promote local consumption, and if you are not able to harness this agri-business, we cannot have a lot of benefits. Maybe presentations were rather on productivity than crucial issues. What you're saying is true. This value chain approach has become a standardized approach in Senegal in the sub-region. The last point, to give some contribution with regard to the research centers. With regard to these research centers that are closed down, I would like to tell Honorable Cissé that he was saying that some of these centers are closed down. I think there is a problem there. Countries should do something, investments related to these centers. It is the countries who have to burn those expenses. CORAF, we are more and more satisfied by the approach that is to share gains. So if you have mechanisms at the regional level, that will make it possible for us to share our knowledge and innovations. I think this is a great thing, and this will help us save a lot of money. And CORAF is doing this well, but it is onus on the countries to invest. Let me give you an example. In Senegal, a lot of ISRA centers were closed down. Research is far away from the producer, and you want the research to transfer its gains, and there the Senegalese government accepted financing, investing so that infrastructures of these research centers should be erected, will be opened again. This year, the state has allotted 3.5 billion for rehabilitation and opening of these research centers. So it behooves the states to do that. It is up to them to encourage the researchers, because if you investing and then you are not motivating the staff, they will leave. So it is the business of the states. Now, with regard to the other partners, they also have to support these research work.
J'espère que je ne vais pas vous faire.
Ministre
ne vous ferai pas taper, que vous ne parlerez pas à mon patron.
I think you're not going to give a word to my boss. I mean, you said that they are still waiting for results. Usually I say that people neglect the fact that whatever the level of agriculture today, this level has been explained by the level of research. People forget that. People forget that research did something, making it possible to assess the level of agriculture today. We have some gains, and we had them in more rainy conditions, more favorable, positive environments. And now that we have problem, it is not now that we have to fragilize, so to speak, this research, but rather to encourage the adoption. So research did a lot for our countries. What we have to do now is to do better, far better than that. Thank you.
Yes, can you just take maybe one or two more before we break for lunch? Yes, you. And then the third person. So please, we're starting with you, sir. Mike.
Yeah, this is an Paul Dorosh paper. Although he gave answer in English, still I'm not convinced about his growth equity trade-off. Suppose the growth, instead of 8%, you said 6%, but then your resources will be less, and your tax revenue will be less. So if it is higher growth, you have more resources, you can still invest in agriculture. So I'm not very convinced about your growth equity trade-off. Yeah.
C'est bon, je suis là. Merci. Abdurrahman Wan, Sirad.
Thank you. My name is Abdurrahman Wan from Sirad. I want to take you back to the discussion we had earlier on the choice that needs to be made, reducing poverty or promoting wealth. Right? I understand that the choice is not an easy one, but when it comes to economic transformation, especially in the field of agriculture, you don't want to lose sight of the differences that may be there between the various agricultural subsectors, fisheries, livestock, and so on. I think it would have been interesting to try and understand all the internal processes that unfold within this broad sector. Or earlier, when we discussed migration, I think the stress on migration was on migration on the part of agricultural producers rather than the cattle breeders, the livestock people. This is a different sort of situation. And I think this analysis was a sort of macro comparative analysis, a broad one, but there's a lot underneath, and that a lot of processes are underway. There's a real ability on the part of the stakeholders here in Africa, at least, to adapt to these changes. The changes are not only climatic, they are economic, they are sociological, and what have you. So, to me, this did not come out very clearly from the presentations we heard. It seems to me also that the idea that within these systems there's a form of savings that is there. And in livestock, we have more and more farmers who invest in livestock. I wonder whether the notion of poverty can be applied in a similar manner to farmers and to cattle breeders. It may be interesting to try and understand all these differences on the notion of inequity. For instance, I'm not convinced that if you increase GDP, you then have an impact, a positive one at that, on poverty. As an economist, I'm not convinced that there are inequalities that are there. How do you absorb them? There are many ways, because it's too mechanical I think, to say that an increase in the GDP means a reduction in poverty. That it doesn't work that way. Thank you. I'm from UPA, International Development. And my question relates to Dr. Roy-MaCauley's presentation. You know, when in 2003 the Maputo Declaration was issued, it was a pure joy for a lot of us. And in West Africa, we managed to take that on board and craft a regional policy. It was very, very good indeed. But 10 years on, it is as if, from the standpoint of investments, at least, there are some countries who are willing to go the whole way, and others who don't want to do anything. Let me recall what happened in June 2012. On the 7th of June, Nigeria decided, with its private sector, to really give a major boost to agriculture through 256 billion naira, I think. But 10 days later, in the Sahelian countries, the stakeholders who got together and decided that they would finance resilience of West African agriculture, the resilience to food shocks. We made a comparison with English-speaking countries. Sierra Leone made great efforts, which are going to be assessed, I understand, next or shortly in Monrovia. Ghana did exactly likewise. So I want to ask Harold Roy-MaCauley this question. How come in this region there are some who want to take action and who do take action as the English-speaking countries, and on the other hand those who don't seem to respond to the needs of the day, the French-speaking ones? How come? Thank you.
Right, thank you. I think, Doctor, you have one or two issues to respond to, and then Macaulay, and now complete.
Well, I certainly hope my answers can be as good as your questions. But those are excellent points that were raised. I think I want to emphasize again that what we started out with were the economies of Ethiopia and Uganda and their current spending on public investments, and what would happen if we shifted them a little bit one way or the other. So given where we started from in those two countries, Ethiopia with a massive push towards agricultural development over the last 10 years, really remarkable. Uganda with substantial spending in rural areas, but not nearly what we had in Ethiopia. That starting from that point, shifting a little bit more towards agriculture might cost you a little bit in terms of overall output, because we've assumed that investing in these other sectors actually, and increased migration that results, actually improves overall productivity in the urban centers. A very favorable assumption towards urban growth. But even with that extra favorable assumption for urban growth, the agricultural investment reduces poverty more than the non-agricultural investment. And so again, part of this big picture is, you know, in this room, I think almost everybody is cheering for the agricultural investment scenario, right? In other contexts, we could have a room where everybody's cheering for the other scenario. They're saying, look, invest in urban. The world's moving to urban. You have to grow in the urban areas. And I think that part of the big answer is you have to have both. If it's completely unbalanced, you're going to have continuing severe poverty in rural areas, unacceptable. And if you put all of it in rural and invest in agriculture, your agricultural prices will collapse. If you increase your production and you don't have enough demand coming from the rest of the economy, you'll have a problem. And so, again, in the CADP simulations that were done, there's an excellent book out there edited by Xinshen Diao and James Thurlow. I think someone named Shengen Fan is a co-editor, but it's out there, a nice orange cover. But those simulations, we're basically looking at what happens if you increase total factor productivity in agriculture, but also if you have non-ag growth as well to scoop up that extra production. But this question about how far could you push this? I mean, if a little bit more investment in agriculture is good, why not just put it all in agriculture? And again, the reason is because without that demand coming from the rest of the economy, you won't have, you'll have a collapse in the agricultural prices, and you will not get the kind of benefits from the ag investment that we all want to see. But that suggests a whole lot more research, and that means our team has more work to do. So, thank you. Merci.
Yes, well, the question asked, I think it would have been much more appropriate during the first panel. Yeah, but I can say something about it, and I think if we reflect back, I don't know whether you were here during the first panel. Most of the ministers that were here were talking about political will. They all said political will. So that is very, very important. So maybe some of these countries that are struggling with these issues, I'm not saying they don't have political will, but we might want to think that there is something that we have to move in that end. But you also said that, and you were hesitating, but you said that you see this, or you notice this more with Francophone, French-speaking countries. And I don't want to go down that road. I don't want to put English-speaking countries on one side and French-speaking countries on the other side. I can only do that if we have a clear analysis that brings that out. I haven't seen it yet. It's not coming out that way. So political will is important, and the way we interpret, somebody said, I think it was who said, we agreed that in addition to putting 10% of the national budget into agriculture, we also said that we need 1% going to agricultural research. And I've been in several countries and I've listened to several ministers, and the way they interpret this is varied. So I think we need to look at this, because somebody will say, somebody mentioned, where does this money, this investment goes to? Does it really go to increasing productivity, or does it go to just infrastructure? Those are the questions, and I think if you have the answers to that. I met somebody who made a very interesting presentation. He was working on that, and they might be able to tell us more on that and provide evidence-based response to your question. Thank you.
Well, if you can limit yourself to just a minute, that'll be fine.
Yeah.
C'est bon? Je voulais juste dire que ce thème.
I just wanted to say.
Aurait manqué de toute sa pertinence si nous arrêtons uniquement.
If we discuss research only, then we will not have had the comprehensive discussion that we want. And on top of that, we've just discussed public research or government-funded research. Now, as you said, research is a service. It's a service that is there for clients. We have users. Now, the research community must be sensitive to demand, perhaps. At least it's a question that we have to ask ourselves when we craft programs. Have we listened carefully enough to our end users? And the second question is, have we come up with proper answers to the concerns of those users? And the third question, it takes us further in the mere field of government finance research. To me, you have to take on board university research in academia, private research, or other types of research in order to broaden what to me has got to be a system. Now, as long as we stay in our centers or research institutions without opening ourselves up to private research, well, then that private research is going to be totally disconnected from what we're doing, and it will be there to cater for the needs of clients with topical needs. You referred earlier to the genetic potential. Well, GMOs are already here. They are being used. We're not calling them genetically modified organisms, but they are in use here in our region. Now, what do we do about that? How do we make sure the private sector should be interested in the research that takes place in our government institutions and joins hands with us so that we have a comprehensive research system? That's the question. You referred to cost. Governments are not going to be able to carry on for much longer funding this research. We have competition, and as long as there are private laboratories working on the same issues, we'll not be competitive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that I'm not going to attempt to summarize what the experts have said, except to state that maybe there are a few lessons that we need to take home, which were just reminders. One, the fact that apart from committing ourselves to 10% of revenue in agricultural investment, there's also a commitment of 1% to agricultural research, which the various countries have defaulted in doing. I think that if such strong investment in agriculture is going to sit on a weak research foundation, we may not achieve the desired result that we need. We've also been told that even though this regional organization of research is fairly decentralized and democratized, such that we can learn from each other, more importantly, there has to be some attitude change and institutional change, exactly why, and cost effectiveness, exactly why there are smaller regional centers so that individual countries can carry the burden of other countries so that we can have the productivity that we need with perhaps less money. Attitude change is so important. I think it's Albert Einstein who said once that you can't solve problems with the same attitude that created them. So if we have to solve our problems, we have to change the attitude that created them in the first place. I think the presentation by Dr. Dorosh is good, and I think that we can only emphasize the fact that agriculture is the pathway to get rural poverty reduced. So far, I don't think there's any argument about it, because it is also the lopsided investment in urban environment that created the rural poverty in the first place. And so if there's the issue is the other way around, I don't think there's much wrong. Of course, achieving a balance is extremely important, and I agree entirely with him. I think the policy framework looking forward has to also deal with the infrastructure that will sustain the current production and also lift the future production. We have to cope with climate change issues, and most of Africa's agriculture is very little irrigation involved. So how do we get the infrastructure in place so that current production will be sustained and also increased into the future, because rainfall is reducing amounts and it's also coming in very short periods, all of it in one go, and that is not helping us to extend. I think the Indian situation has got to be something that should inform the West Africa region, where India has managed to put the agriculture side that 49% is irrigated and 51% is rain-fed. And I think if we can get to that position, we certainly will be talking about a successful agriculture system in West Africa. I thank you so much for your cooperation.